Hello Sally, hello Ben. Hello everybody, how are you? Now today we're gonna specialise in talking about travelling to Australia, and I'm not going to repeat a lot of stuff, so I'm not going to go through things 2 or 3 times because people might want to watch this at a later date. So forgive me if I don't overly repeat things. I might ask you to watch the feed through at another time. Mainly this was inspired by Ben Stone. How are you, mate? Ben went to Australia last year. I think, Ben, was it in the winter time? I think it was your UK winter time. So Ben went to Australia last year, and he arrived in Cairns, and he wrote a great little blog post about it. It was quite interesting read, Ben. Thank you. And then he wrote to me and said, any tips for if he goes back in 2020? I mean, there's a chance we might still. It was winter. There we go. So we'll talk about that, Ben. We'll talk about that in some detail. But I think you've become quite knowledgeable about some of the pitfalls of travelling in the winter time, in European winter time in Australia. So yeah, we're going to just talk about it, and we might cover a whole bunch of things. I've taken some notes. Yesterday there was a young, I think there was, I forget the name of the girl that was in yesterday. Hopefully she'll drop back in, and she asked me about very unusual request about whale watching, about watching. What type of whales was she? The humpback whales. And Michelle and I have seen them. We've seen them, but I've never really given it a lot of consideration as to when. So if that's your big thing, you want to go there, you do have to kind of research, because the humpbacks.
It was Anne, and she said, "Hi, it was me."
Oh, she's
back.
Hello, Anne. Thank you very much, Anne. Should have made a note. I saw the thing, but we were. There it is, Anne Skelchi. That's correct, Anne. So Anne was asking about that, so I'll cover that briefly at the beginning here, Anne, because you kindly asked about it, and I really wasn't fully. I've seen the whales when we used to live up in Queensland, so I know that you can see them on many of the coastlines. The whales basically migrate from the colder regions of the southern oceans. They want to get up to the hotter regions. It's usually when they've got the whale calves, so they're actually taking them to the warmer seas because they haven't got enough blubber and fat on their bodies to survive in the colder winters. So they come up the whole, if you can imagine, well, here's Australia, they're coming up. Now, having said that, I've read a lot yesterday, Anne, about it's fantastic to watch the whales down in Tasmania. So I guess if you're going to get really down in Tassie itself, would be a good place to do some whale watching. But you have to get the right time of year. So you have to they're not always. I think in Tasmania you've got a good chance, but in the colder months, the colder seasons, they're going to move up the coast. So they sort of go around Australia, and you'll get some going up on the Perth side, some going up. And different whales as well, so you'll get different types of whales that will go at certain times of year in certain areas. We certainly used to see the whales off of Noosa when I lived up in Queensland. We'd see the whales going off the coast there, but it was a little way out, and you'd need to go out in a boat to get some real sort of close-up encounters.
We also saw them when we were up near Broome, didn't we?
Yeah, we saw them up in Broome. We've seen them up on the western side of Australia as well. So it's a great place for whale watching, but you do need to check your times of year with everything, because there's a sort of migratory pattern. So check them out. I did double check, and actually there are some places near Byron Bay which are particularly good. So there's some great areas where you can get, but there are some really fantastic whale watching tours that you can do. So they'll give you the advice, they'll tell you when to come, and they'll take you out on the boats, and you can get right up close to the whales. Which is pretty stunning stuff to do. So that's the whales. I'll certainly, if there's more questions, we're going to. But as I said yesterday, I'm not an expert on whale migration and things. It's always a delight to see them, particularly I like to see the dolphins. We also used to see the dolphins on. I just say hello to Michelle. She's over there.
Hi,
she's doing the admin in the back, checking your comments, see if I miss anything. She would sit next to me, but we haven't got the space here. It's a tiny little alcove.
I'm comfortable in it.
And she's happy, she's comfortable, and I like chatting, as you all know.
So Anne's in, and Ben's in, and Sally's in, Elma Medina's in, our J O chimes in. Daniel, we met in China.
Oh, I can see a few on here. So Jochum. Jochum, Daniel, hello, Leo, hello, Hugo, Faisal, hello everybody. Great to have you in. Now, if you didn't know, Michelle and I took 12 months touring around Australia the year before last. So we actually got ourselves our little yellow Jeep and we toured all the way around the outsides of Australia. We had a great time. So we can give you some good tips. Now, the thing I'd probably start with is one of the things I noticed from your blog post, Ben, is when to go. Now, I don't know quite why Ben chose particularly to go to Cairns, which is right up the top of Australia. But Cairns is notoriously hot, and Ben realised this when he got there. And I always think people tend to forget they're getting away from the European winter and they head to Australia. It's our summer. The globe, is upside down, so we get our points where we're closest to the sun during your winter. So yeah, Cairns can be an absolute scorcher. Michelle and I were up in Catherine in the Northern Territories, and it's so hot to the point it's hard to get much done. So I would definitely say, remember, if you're coming to Australia, if you come in the summertime, Australian summertime, European, American winter time, you've got to be prepared for that heat, and it's a really intense heat, and you're probably better to be honest, to come to Australia if you want to get the best and most clement weather, to come in our winter time, which is your summertime. So the weather can be cooler, but if you're going to come in around Christmas time, you're going to have those high temperatures. You're possibly better off to stay in places like Victoria, down south. Tasmania is a fantastic place to be, by the way, and Tassie is a wonderful place to visit. Often forgotten about, Tasmania and Canberra. Canberra's interesting. Canberra is our capital. A lot of people tend to think it's Sydney, but Canberra is the capital, part of the ACT, the Central Territories. So, or the Capital Territory, sorry, not the Australian Capital Territory. A lot of people don't know about Canberra. Michelle and I spent Christmas in Canberra the year before last. Beautiful place to be, very quiet as well, very quiet, because the ACT, the Capital Territories around Canberra, are very much populated by people that work for the government. So a lot of those people leave the capital during the Christmas months and go back to their homes elsewhere. And so you can actually really enjoy, the central Canberra, which is a capital city, is quiet, so quiet at Christmas time. You can park right in the centre. I saw you, Hema.
Hema says hi.
Oh, Uti.
Visited Uti.
Beautiful, beautiful part of the world. So we're just putting up a video probably this weekend about Uti, if all goes well, unless something else comes up that we have to do. So definitely choose your times.
And
Ben
is saying, I'm told domestic tourism in Cairns, Brisbane during the Australian winter is high, since a lot of Australians from the south are wanting to get away from the colder weather.
Probably not as far up as Cairns, though. They tend
in the winter time, the grey nomads go.
I do, but they tend to. A lot of them will go up to the Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast, other popular areas. So a lot lower down than Cairns and Darwin. They're coming down. The most popular areas for the grey nomads, as they call them, to get away is often Sunshine Coast or Gold Coast. That's Brisbane below and Brisbane above. So below Brisbane is the Gold Coast. This is more sort of slot machines and boozy sort of atmosphere. It's high-rise buildings. Above Brisbane, you've got the Sunshine Coast, a lot more low-rise. I think, personally, I like the Sunshine Coast. We lived there for a number of years, and it feels more Australian to me. It feels more relaxed and chilled back. But either of those areas are super popular. Cairns and Darwin's a long way from people who it's a long old drive if you're going up that way from some of the cooler climates, like the equivalent of the snowbirds in Australia who go down to Florida. during the winter months would be ours going up north during the winter months. So yes, they do tend to gravitate. It's a long way to go to Darwin. You know, Ben, if you've been there, it's a long way. I don't think too many people, and you don't need to leave. See, if you're living in Sydney or any part of New South Wales, you don't really need to go up. The winter months are not cold. They're quite pleasant, so they don't need to go up that far. So I think it's more you get a lot of backpackers going up there, but as you know, personally, I would never go to Darwin or Cairns in the summer months. It's unbearable. I used to have a few friends in Alice Springs, in the centre, the heart of. We have some friends in that area, and they always say, you know, the properties there, people leave Alice Springs in the hot summer months. They literally just get away. They might get down, if you're in Coober, Pedy, which is below Alice Springs, have I got that right? Coober, Pedy, people live in caves. They're sort of troglodyte lifestyles. So it's a beautiful place, Coober, Pedy, if you get to go there, Ben. You'll see people living underground to get away from the heat. So this is a famous gem mining area of Australia as well. So it's got a lot of history, a lot of prospectors.
Ben said heat was unbearable on some days, but to be honest, tourism was quite nice.
Yeah, but at the flip side of that, Ben, was how is the high tourism? I'm not sure. I don't think high tourism, particularly in Cairns, would be unbearable. Australia really doesn't suffer, apart from in the central parts of Melbourne and Sydney, with really high density tourism, and it can be quite a nice sort of easy tourism. Some of the places will be. I mean, you don't want to go to Ayers Rock and places like that in the peak season, because you literally would just feel like you're on a conveyor belt. So, Ben, do you intend to go back to Queensland? And I wanted to sort of make this a little bit about Queensland, because Michelle and I used to live up there, and there's some beautiful parts. Certainly, if you're going to go to Queensland, and I'll let Ben answer that.
Says, yes, I do intend to go back to Queensland, definitely.
And what months, Ben, have you decided? I know this all dependent on the COVID situation. I wasn't going to say that today, but what months?
Ben also said a little bit earlier, he says, people don't realise how big Australia is. I considered going to Brisbane during my time there, and the flight would have been 3 hours. Yes,
and we're going to talk about that in a moment as well, Ben, because it's another thing that people don't realise just how big. I mean, Australia as a landmass is as big as the United States of America as a landmass, and I think that even includes Alaska. So it's a massive landmass. And September. Okay, so you'll still be going into the warmer season. So if I were you, I'd certainly do what you said and talk about getting a car or transport of some sort, because you don't want to be stuck in one location. And I would certainly go further south. I absolutely love some of the hinterlands behind the Sunshine Coast. You get the cooler, up in the hills. You get Montville, Mullaney. Some of those towns, they're a little touristic, but they're very pretty. If you can get down as far as sort of Rainbow Beach, which is a beautiful beach with the coloured sands, Townsville, you'd come down through Townsville, and you would come, if you can, to, this is a place that Michelle and I like, Noosa. And now it is a bit sort of cliche, because Noosa is the sort of the Saint-Tropez or the Nice of Australia. It's where a lot of the jet set used to go in the day, and it used to be a place fairly expensive. But if you can go there, it is absolutely beautiful. It's got this sort of ecosystem in Noosa. It's got famous for its biosphere or its nature sphere. There's I should know, we lived there for long enough, but just the beautiful scenery around there, and the coastal walks, which you mentioned in your blog post, Ben. The coastal walks are to die for gorgeous along the Noosa coastline, even down as far as Mooloolaba, Caloundra. You can go up into Toowoomba, up into the mountains and things. There's lots of small towns. Don't necessarily head to Brisbane. I absolutely, and please forgive me, people of Brisbane. I wouldn't head to Brisbane, not if I wanted to see the real sort of Queensland of Australia. I wouldn't go to Brisbane. I'd go to some of the small towns, probably some of the coastal towns.
He says, I did think about Townsville. Would you recommend that as a place to visit?
Yeah, I think so. It does get hot still in Townsville. You're still up there, and you also still got pretty much Townsville and above. You can't swim because of the box jellyfish and the sharks and the things. So all the things that people fear most in Australia tends to happen above that sort of. If you get down to as low as Mooloolaba, Noosa, you can actually swim. There's some beautiful beaches, and they're all manned by lifeguards. So the RSL are on the surf lifesavers. Man those beaches. They do man the beaches all the way up the coast. Even some of the more remote coastal towns, you'll see flags on the beach, and there's often lifesavers on the beach. But once, I think Townsville, don't quote me, but I think Townsville, you can't even go in the water up there. There's just too much that basically wants to nibble your leg off or send you into a sort of toxic fit. So you've also got to watch out in the waterways pretty much north of the Sunshine Coast. You've got to be careful, but you've got to be careful everywhere, of the saltwater crocs as well. So you've got everything that wants to eat you will be in that area, Ben. So you've got to be careful. But it's got a great feel. It's that part of the world's got a real Aussie sort of feel to it, and you can go inland. You can go west of there as well if you have. You got to use common sense. Sorry, I just saw that, Ben. You got to use common sense, and there's a lot of advice from where you can swim and where you can't swim. And to be honest, we paint a picture of everything will kill you in Australia. It really isn't that way. Michelle and I spent almost a year in a canvas tent touring around Australia, and we never had problems with animals and creepy crawlies and things. They don't trouble me very much, so the sight of them wouldn't scare me. And we might talk a little bit more about that if the questions start coming in. But for the time being, definitely, Ben, if you're going to go to Queensland again, I would consider getting some sort of transportation. Now, you mentioned that hiring a car and the rent, the insurance was really expensive. And that's one of the things, Michelle and I, having traveled for 5 years and probably another sort of 10 or 15 years before that, we have always done very well on renting vehicles when we've traveled. We often pay almost nothing for our vehicle hire. And the way you can do that, Ben, is not actually renting a vehicle, but buy a vehicle. You can quite easily buy a car with modest mileage on the best place I would advise you to look before you went there would be carsales.com. You can go to yards as well and buy them, and you will take a bit of a hit if you buy them from a car yard, from a retailer. But you can quite often find you can buy something and use it for 3 months, 6 months even. Have I just lost my internet connection? No. Are we still there? So you can, all my connection just went off briefly. So you can buy a vehicle, anywhere from you can get something fairly roadworthy, and we'll talk about roadworthy, which is another Aussie term. You can get something that can take you around for maybe, there's a bit on the low end to 10,000 Australian dollars. Now that's a big investment, but if you sell it back to the market for if you pay 10 for it and sell it back for 9, it's a cheap way of having a vehicle for 3 months. And it just takes a bit of planning, and then you can take out sort of regular local insurance. You're not going to get stung for those high tourism insurance. The other thing, Ben, you can do, and you asked about this a little bit, there are global insurance. Michelle and I have taken out, now I'm not going to recommend anything because it's a while since we've done it, and I would be completely inaccurate if I told you about it to be truth. But there are global insurance companies that will give you auto insurance in many countries in the world, including the USA, by the way. So you can actually check out. It's obviously important to check if they're reputable, but you can get global annual insurance for 12 months of the year for a fraction of the cost of buying insurance in the countries, because they really sting you when you try to rent a car in the US or Europe or Australia. They really sting you with the ridiculously high insurance, and they'll frighten you into forcing you to try and take out this insurance with all sorts of horror stories. But you can get really good quality insurance, and it will cover even repatriation and all sorts of things if you shop around. Now, yeah, ask your questions if you get them. I'll just move. So even getting an RV, getting a camper van, Ben, is a nice thing, and it often comes completely, inclusive of the insurance. There's a couple of really cool companies in Australia that I think are actually Kiwi-owned, New Zealand-owned companies. Correct me if I'm wrong. Juicy Campers and Hippie Campers, very cheap, sort of basic camper vans. I've never used them. I'm not endorsing them, so you have to, do your own sort of diligence on that and check whether they're good. But we see a lot of travellers in Juicy and Hippie Campers travelling around Australia. You can get fairly inexpensive, but for me, if it were me going, I would always look at buying my own vehicle. The next flip side of that goes back to what Ben mentioned before. It's a big country, and I have seen a lot of people over the years, quite a few, some of them even got their own YouTube travel channels, who head off to Australia, buy themselves a vehicle. Now, one of the big problems we have in Australia is we followed the American system of going with sort of like 6-cylinder big cars, big engine capacities. So a lot of the older vehicles tend to be ridiculously big capacities. If you can try and get European vehicles or Japanese vehicles, most of our older Aussie cars are American style with big gas guzzlings. Why I'm saying that is I've seen a lot of people go to Australia and think, we're going to drive from, we're going to drive from Sydney, we're going to drive over to Perth, and then we're going to come up round the top. It costs a lot of money in fuel. You'll pay almost as much in fuel as you might do in accommodation costs, so it can get really expensive. And I've seen a lot of people have to cut their journeys short because they didn't realise how much it was going to cost them in fuel. And you can't really judge the city prices either, because when you get outside the city into sort of outback Australia or Smallville Australia, your prices can go up quite a big percentage as well for fuel. So if you're going to buy a vehicle, fuel is going to be your biggest expense. You might be able to buy a vehicle for 10,000 Aussie dollars, and you may be able to sell it back for 9,500 and think, well, that's a good deal. $500 for 3 months of touring is good, and it is good. But remember your fuel costs. One day I might go through our fuel costs when we were driving around, but I haven't got them to hand. But it was a fair old chunk. As long as you're moving, you're spending on fuel, and that often catches people out, doesn't it, Michelle? That catches a lot of people out.
There's 2 people in saying hello. Rena C says hello from Boston. And
hello.
Says, good morning from Alabama. And Petri says, hi Stephen, Michelle, I'm on a break from work. I wanted to say a quick hi. I'll have to watch the playback later. Hi
Petri, yes do. And there'll be lots of information on here if you're planning to come to Australia, if you're planning to come over to see us. There's a lot of good info we're going to cover on this live stream today. Now, I saw somebody say they wanted to ask a question. Were there some particular questions came? Were they relevant?
That one wasn't particularly relevant to what you're talking about.
I don't mind if they're a little off topic.
Okay, well, Rena C said tempting. Ants, spiders and flies, oh my.
Flies are the worst thing. I don't mind the ants. They really don't trouble you. Spiders are never going to give you any real thing. Flies can be an absolute pain. In some parts of Australia at certain times of year, they can be an absolute pain. So a lot of you may remember pictures of an Australian outback man with a cork hat, corks hanging down. There are times when you really wish you had a cork hat, but actually nowadays it's a really good investment before you go, even consider going, Ben, before you get on the road. Get yourself one of those good quality, they're not expensive, £4 or £5 maximum, nets to go over a brimmed hat. and they keep the flies off you, because you will get to places in Queensland and many other parts of Australia where the flies just become an absolute pain. And you can pick up, as you're traveling, little cheap nets to go on, but they're never as good as the ones you can buy online before you go. So get something decent that feels comfortable, that'll keep the flies out, that doesn't completely, some of them are so dark you can't barely see through them. So just get something good. It's well worth it.
Ben also said, by the way, the only reason I remember that I had to wear a helmet when cycling was because of a previous video from your channel. Thanks for the reminder. Quite odd though, in the UK it's not a legal requirement when it is in Australia.
We're a nanny state in Australia, mate. There's a lot of rules that people have to adhere to. The helmet rule is a bone of contention. We have lots of things that come out. One person falls off their bike, hurts their head. Everybody has to wear helmets. I don't entirely agree with it, and we can argue that point till the cows come home. Like many things, I'm not necessarily going to agree with it, but it is the law. You do have to wear a helmet when you're on a bike. It does put a lot of people off renting street bikes in Australia. We have like the free street bikes or the very cheap to rent street bikes, and it literally kills the thing in Victoria, in Sydney. A lot of people just don't want to put on second-hand helmets that are there, or they can't jump on a bike and just cycle around the city centre because they don't have a helmet. And who wants to put on some daggy old helmet that 300 people have worn? So yeah, or you've got to wear some sort of shower cap. It's really just the way it is. You do have to wear helmets if you're going to be on a bike we're just talking about a cycle bike. So that's the rules, and you will get fined if you don't wear them, or at least you'll get probably. No, actually, the police are happy to hand out fines. It's another thing. You will get fined for almost anything. I think actually, wild animals. Spiders, snakes, sharks, crocs, they're probably less likely to give you grief driving around Australia than the local police are. Sorry guys, but it's true,
So it was Hemmer that wanted to ask the question. They said, what happened to your chef kind of life?
What happened to my chef kind of life? A lot of people ask about that. I got a question the other day on a video I put up that was about off topic, and somebody said, don't mix food with politics. That's a red rag to a bull to me. I almost feel like setting up the political chef channel just to sort of do it. We did the cooking channel for a long time, and we've got 1,000+ recipes on there. There's a lot to see. A lot of people say to me, why don't you do cooking? I say, have you seen most of what I've done? And Michelle and I started to travel. I don't want to go into this too much because this is not what this stream's about, Rena. But we decided to travel. We did for 2 years. We kept entertaining you with cooking, but it destroyed our traveling. It absolutely made it a nightmare. We weren't enjoying it, and now we're just going to have fun and travel, and we'll get back to cooking whenever we go. And if people want cooking, let's be frank, there are tens of thousands of YouTube cooking channels and tens of thousands of them. So, you don't have to rely on me. And if you want to, I'll always indulge you talking about food. And when I get the chance to start cooking, I will, when it's good for us. Today's live stream, though, is about traveling in Australia. So now the other thing I wanted to mention, did you have another question?
Amy said hi, and are the spiders big in Australia?
Yeah, they can be, Amy. They can be as big as your head. But the bigger the spider is in Australia, the less likely it is to give you any grief. So don't worry about that. Huntsman spider, which is probably one of our bigger species of spiders in Australia. Beautiful animals. And I know if you've got an arachnophobia, if you're scared, then there's probably nothing I can say to convince you, but what I can say is you're no more likely to see a spider in Australia than you are to see it in a house in the UK, to be honest, and the little house spiders. And we love huntsmen because they actually keep a lot of the bugs down. They're a house spider, but they can be a good sort of 6-8 inches across. The bodies can be the size of a sort of an old 50p piece for those of you in the UK, and probably about I can't think of a coin equivalent in the US. So they're good spiders. They keep the bugs down. Most the more lethal, the worst spider you're going to come across is a funnel web spider, probably. A lot of people are frightened of redbacks. They don't give me a lot of don't care much for redback. They're perfectly okay. In other words, I'm not scared of redbacks. The last person to die, I think, of a redback bite was in the 1960s, and that was because they were weak. It's a little bit like this virus that's going around. They were already fairly weak and sick. It's more like a bee sting or a hornet sting, maybe at the most. So, a lot of creepy crawlies, a lot of things. I'm going to be honest with you, because I could do the Aussie thing and talk to you about drop bears and all the horrible things that we've got there that are going to kill you. But I want to encourage you to go to Australia. I don't want to put you off. And I think if you're scared of, off the bat, you're already scared of wildlife there, that's an injustice, because it's not going to give you a lot of grief. Probably the most I would be advising you to be cautious of, Ben, particularly if you're going to be up there in the northern parts of Queensland, would be waterways. Keep the worst, probably the worst animal out there is the crocs, the big crocs, saltwater crocs, particularly by the coast. You've got to be very careful. Those things will literally just come out at speed and take you away. So that's just it's just life.
I mean, that croc in the picture, in the thumbnail.
The croc in my thumbnail, that one was a freshie as we call them, on the banks of one of the big lakes, probably up near Catherine or somewhere like that, a bit in the Northern Territories. And those things, they're pussycats. They're not going to give you a lot, even though that one was probably a couple of meters long. Metre and a half, couple of meters, and that sort of croc's not going to give you a lot of problems. They're more like an alligator, I think, than a crocodile. The other thing getting around, Ben, if you're going to sort of go from city to city, if you're going to go from Cairns, say, down to Townsville, or you're going to go to one of the other cities, flying is very cheap in Australia. And I'm going to quickly caveat that by saying, we're talking about Virgin Airlines are talking about going into liquidation, and we might lose Virgin Airlines. And of course, Richard Branson saying it'd be a bad thing for Australia because we'll lose our competition. But Virgin is not the only budget airline in Australia. There are quite a few of them. So, at the moment, there's no signs of that changing. You can get from city to city for sometimes as little as sort of 30, 40 bucks even on certain times of the year, but certainly no more than maybe 90 to 100 bucks between a city, and that's Australian dollars, so that's only about 70 US. Or maybe it's not. Maybe with the current crisis, it's probably about sort of like $3 60 or something. I don't know. I'm pretty sure our currency will be hitting the proverbial. So you've got Jetstar, my least favourite airline in the world. You've got a few others, Tiger Airlines. There's a lot in there.
So Ben said he didn't plan on driving around Australia. He just wanted to be able to drive a little bit further out. If I travel to a few cities when I go back, it will be flying. That's why I may need to rent a car instead. I still want to go back to Cairns, but I'll definitely want to go to other places in Queensland.
You should do, man. Queensland is a great place. It's sort of God's own country, as they say. It's just beautiful and warm. The weather's good. I really would advise you to try some of the towns outside of Brisbane, some of the smaller towns, even in the sort of hinterlands, the back away. Brisbane is Brisbane. It's a city. It's like anywhere else. It's to me, it's not my favourite city in Australia. Nothing wrong with it, mind you. It's just not the most inspiring city. But some of the larger towns around it are just great. So there's some good things to see. Now, the other thing, if you do, just go back quickly, if you do decide to get a car rental, or you want to buy a vehicle, a cheap sort of runaround vehicle, hang on, we just got a bit of one of those motorbikes going past. That guy's been coming past this last week. He's a pain in the backside because it'll do it at 2 o'clock in the morning, wake everybody up. So if you want to get a motorbike, that's also a fairly cheap way to travel around Australia. Don't get a gas guzzler. Don't get one of the big Land Cruisers or one of the big old, some of the more modern Toyotas are a bit cheaper to run, but don't get one of those awful big old 6-cylinder vehicles, because you will pay whatever you've saved, you'll pay in fuel. And I remember a couple of friends of ours some years back who went, young kids that were on their gap year in university, and they took their father's big Toyota Land Cruiser and decided they'd drive all the way from Melbourne up to Queensland. I think they got up to Sydney and run out of money because they didn't realise how much it was going to cost in fuel. So they were back with the tails between the legs after a very short drive. Now the other thing also, and this is a little note that I've made here for you, particularly in Perth, but other parts of Australia, fuel can greatly fluctuate during the week. So we often have like what is classed as a cheap Tuesday. And the fuel at the moment, fuel prices are low in Australia. They're historically at the lowest they've been, as they probably are elsewhere. But when we were traveling, fuel could be 135, 140 a litre. And on the Tuesday in Perth, was it Tuesday, Perth, or Monday? Tuesday in Perth, it could drop down by 10, 15, 20 cents a litre just on that one day and then go back up again. So if you've got to put a full tank of fuel into a vehicle, check where you are in Australia and see if there is a day of the week when fuel is cheaper, and it can save you a lot of money. I mean, if you're getting a full tank, some people are going around in Land Cruisers and they've got extra tanks in there. Maybe they've got a 40 litre or couple of 60 litre tanks underneath, and they fill those things up to drive. I always remember telling somebody about that in Perth, and they hadn't known, and they just filled up their vehicle, and they could have saved like about $80 if they bought the following day. So it's a big fluctuation in petrol prices. It can be quite irritating because on Tuesday morning in Perth and the suburbs around Perth, the people are queuing out onto the highway trying to get fuel. And if you tip for that, go in the evening. Go after 9, 10 o'clock in the evening, and nobody's generally there, so that's always a good thing.
We use the apps, don't we, to find them?
Yeah, there's a Gas Buddy is a good app if you want to check the prices on Gas Buddy. There's one or two other fuel apps out there, but I think Michelle and I used Gas Buddy, I think. There are a couple of others. So I've talked about car rentals and insurance. You can certainly save a lot on vehicle insurance if you own the vehicle and you're willing to sell it. It's not as difficult as it sounds. I know I can't walk you through the process, but Michelle and I have done it many times in different countries around the world, and it's not as difficult as it sounds. Now, the places to stay, I think one of the things you're going to find very expensive in Australia quite often is accommodation costs, and a lot of people use Airbnb. To me, Airbnb is kind of spoiled travel in a way. It's made everything more expensive rather than cheaper, particularly in countries that didn't have Airbnb before, where they're all sort of, it doesn't matter whether you're in sort of Botswana or London, they're all looking and asking the same sort of price a night. Whereas before Airbnb, quite often you go to remote parts of the world and you could get an apartment for sort of, I don't know, $110 a month for an apartment. Now everybody wants the same price everywhere in the world. So you've got your Airbnb, you've got your hotels.com and your TripAdvisor and all these different apps. They're certainly good. If you're going to Australia, my biggest tip would be try and get longer term rentals if you can. Negotiate with an Airbnb host and see if you get longer term rentals. You'll save a lot of money that way. The nightly rates, if you're there for only 3 or 4 weeks, and that's going to take me to another point. Don't go to Australia for 2 or 3 weeks. It's a long way for most of you to go. You really need to go there for a good month, 2 months, 3 months, if you can, 6 months. It's a long way to travel. And Ben also found out, I think he was a little surprised just how long that trip was. It's a long flight. Even if we were to fly back from here, from Turkey, we'd have to stop off somewhere. It's going to be 36, 40 odd hours of traveling just to get back to Australia.
He said, I only learned that after I arrived in Australia about splitting up my flight journey. So I transited through Singapore on the way back. Stayed overnight was much better than just a single 23-hour flight. And that's a tip I was going to cover here, Ben, but you've hit the nail on the head. It's a long way to come. So if you can stop in Singapore, you can stop in Bangkok, and you can have a day, 2 days, maybe. Even if you've got a long trip and you're coming over for
months at a time to Australia. It's a really good thing to stop for a week in a country like Malaysia or Bangkok and just break that flight up, because not only will you have a wonderful experience staying in those cities, but it will make that long haul flight just that little bit easier. And the best cities to transit through are definitely Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia and Bangkok in Thailand. They're great hubs for commuting. So you can often get a much cheaper flight, by the way, from, let's say, if you're coming from Hamburg in Germany or somewhere in Holland or maybe in the USA, quite often find really much better priced flights to Kuala Lumpur than you would do to Australia. Once you're in Kuala Lumpur, you can often buy an ongoing flight then from KL to any part of Australia with AirAsia or AirAsia X or one of the other budget airlines, which will get you a much cheaper flight overall. Just another little tip. Any other questions while we're in that mode?
I think I've got them all earlier.
So one of the things I've had asked in the past, what about train travel? Train travel in Australia is horrendously expensive. It really has become, I'm not talking about just getting around the city, which is not such a bad thing if you're in the city and you've got to get around on train. But intercity train travel and long distance train travel in Australia has become just a pastime of the rich and famous. Most of the trains will cost you many thousands of dollars to do trips between, say, Sydney and Perth. They're all a bit Orient Express. They're all a bit sort of fancy pants flights, train journeys. They can be for Michelle and I to have gone on the train journey that we wanted to do, it just didn't budget. We were $10,000 plus just to go on a 3-day train journey. It's too expensive. So I would not be considering train journeys. Coach journeys, yes, intercity coach journeys are very good. We have a Greyhound service similar to the one in the US, and you can get coaches between cities. They're pretty good. The coaches are pretty tidy, but they're long trips. And if you like coach travel, go for it. Personally, I prefer to drive. Now,
the question just come in from Chris Garton. Says, hi, Steve and Michelle.
Hi, Chris.
What about food and eating out in Australia? Are there many independent bakeries also?
I'll get to that in just a second, Chris. That's coming just very close to my next list, so I'm going to cover that, Chris. Just one last thing on going around the country in vehicles. Michelle and I, as a lot of you know, if you've watched the Australian travel series, we went in a tent. I enjoyed it. We had a good time, but I really was jealous of people with RVs, recreational vehicles. I think tenting is definitely a very budget-friendly way of touring around Australia. There's some great places you can pitch your tent. So it is really good. There's some great facilities out there. There's very few restrictions on using campfires and things. In a lot of places you can cook on the campfire. It's a good option. If you're going outside the cities, camping is good. If it fits your budget, definitely a camper van would be the way I would go. Now let me just check. Any other hotels can be a little expensive, but if you look on hotels.com, Trivago.com, there are so many apps out there, and actually Google now has some really good hotel search options on there, so you can find hotels. As a rule, motels, overnight motels on your drive between cities are going to be about $100, give or take $20 either way. You can actually talk with a lot of these motel owners and get good deals for a week. They'll discount for a week, or they'll discount for a month and give you much better rates. So you can consider that. You can stay in hostels as well. There's some great hostels in the cities. Mainly in the cities, you'll find Hostel World is a good way of looking up for. You can get discounts by becoming a member of the hosteling YHA, the Youth Hosteling Association. And don't forget, you can join the YHA even if you're not a youth. You know, you can any age group can join the YHA. We were members, and I'm just a little out of my teens now. So that you get extra discounts, but you have to like that style of. You have to like that style. What time are we, Michelle? Do you know what I'm going to do, guys? If it's all right with you, before we talk about the food, I'm going to see if I can take you downstairs, because I can smell, coming through the window, I can smell the bread is baking, the pide is baking downstairs. So I'm going to pop downstairs. You want to come with me? Look, we might lose connection, but
You will be back.
But I will be back. If it disconnects on my little trundle downstairs, forgive me, it will come back on. But I'm going to go quickly through the dark staircase. We're going to go downstairs, get a beautiful fresh pide. It's like a Ramadan bread. So I'm going to see if I can get the egg one, the egg pide. What is that? 350 on the side there, Michelle?
2.25%.
Because I'm hungry. Are you guys hungry? There is some Turkish 1 lira for those of you.
And 25 cents.
Want to see? Now I shall pop. I shall pop a mask on. Now I'll be good. Now I will lose connection, as I said. So, and it might go a little echoey, and I've got to pop a mask on. So, let's go quickly. Show you how close the Bakers is. I'll turn the camera around so you can see. Okay, we are here. Here's the Bakers. Pull that down. And I'm back. I'm back, am I? There's a queue because they're baking bread, man. It smells so good. Hello. Social distancing. So here's the Bakers. I thought it was quiet. Normally when I come down here, there's no one here. Ita. Yeah, I'm gonna get the egg one today. But I've got to wait. I thought I'd be really quick, but the connection's okay, yeah? So how are things? Questions, if you want to ask questions while we're down here. It's really busy, man. I thought I was coming down for a 30-second, grab some bread. Look at this road. It's busy, man. Busy, busy, busy. It's going to be worth it though. They're just baking. Taha, how are you, man? Is the egg pide good now?
Yes, it just came out.
Oh, beautiful, man. This is the regular pide or the egg?
Egg with egg.
350?
Yes, bro.
Man, beautiful. Thank you, guys. Enjoy. Thank you. Oh, that's hot. That has just come out of the oven. Okay, we're going to disconnect again, okay? We're just going to go upstairs. We're back. We're back. That's super hot. Hello.
You did disconnect the phone. I kept them entertained.
You've got the sound on, Michelle.
Turning it off now.
Okay.
So Ben said, thought they'd only speak in the local language. Good English.
No, I can. If Taha's not there, I have to say, bir pide, one pide.
Timur says I can translate the locals, and then says, oh, they speak English.
Taha does, which is good. I didn't have to. They actually all can understand me, but I tried to say in Turkish if I can. But look at this.
We'll bring it to you, and you can cut it.
Oh, I didn't realize it was going to be so busy.
That's what I said. I think because the bread's fresh, isn't it? That's why.
Here's my rubbishy. I can't look at that. So this pide has got fresh egg yolk on it. They put a yolk on the egg. I think it's just the yolk. I don't think they use the whole egg. And then it's a little bit, this is a special bread just for the Ramadan period. And this is too hot almost to hold. It's so fresh. And what I will do, just here, look, I'm just gonna use my knife and cut it through into quarters.
Just going to turn it. Oh. You could put them down.
Gonna have to put you ladles and jelly spoons down a moment. And so pop that one away. I'll get another plate if I may, Michelle. Oh, that's hot. Whoa, that's hot. This is my favourite time of day when the thread. It's doing me no good for my waistline. So I cut it into quarters. Leave that one there, Michelle. I'm gonna eat that one. It's a little thinner. I'm gonna eat this one.
Just gonna move the board out of the way.
Let me just we'll just pop it close by though. I might need it. And for me, I don't know what you guys would have with pide. If you've had pide before, I've got a lovely bit of a creamy feta cheese, Turkish feta. Lovely and creamy, a little bit tart as feta should be. I'm going to
Serena says, wow, no exaggeration, that bakery is super close by.
That is very close by, isn't it? The floor of this apartment gets actually warm from the bakery. And I told them I'll call in. I said I'm going to call in to get bread. Normally when I go, there's no one there. And I thought I'd be down and up within sort of 30 seconds. Hope you don't mind standing out in the street there.
Saying how Tammy was saying how they're blocking the road, the cars just stopped.
Yeah.
On the road to get the bread.
Could I have gone down at a busier time? There was about 5 or 6 cars all blocking the road. Everybody was queuing ahead of me, so I had to wait for the pide to come out. Taha, the lad that serves me down there, was down in the basement bringing up fresh bread.
So Chris says, do you buy fresh bread every day? Not anymore.
I used to buy it at least every day, Chris, but I've started to. But I'll tell you one thing: if you want to lose weight quickly, stop eating bread. It's one of the things that always caused us in the past to put a lot of weight on. And I've eaten in India some fantastic breads, and now here in Turkey, the breads are sublime. And I'm having this one for you. I'm taking one for the guys, basically.
Timur says, don't eat until Azan calls. Just kidding.
You're not going to make me go and do the right thing here, I'm afraid. I'm not actually taking part in Ramadan myself. And this will not be hot.
So Ghost Pepper says, is this live? You sound Australian, not British.
Well, yeah, we are Australian, but I'm British Australian. I'm English Australian. I get enough stick about it in Australia from some of my mates, so I'm happy to say it. I'm proudly English, but I'm also immensely proudly Australian. And it is our home. It is our home.
And Chris says, have you tried any sourdough in Turkey so far?
No, not yet, although I'm sure they have it here. I haven't seen. I'm not sure what yeast they use for this. It could even be a sourdough yeast. So what I tend to like to do is get the bread and just tear a little bit off. You can see it's got a little egg wash on top of it. I like to, while it's warm, put a little bit of a good feta cheese on there. Now, get your questions in now. Michelle will read them out. I'm going to be chewing for a minute.
Roberta says, how did COVID-19 from all the flying? Needed a longer question.
More questions would be
More
good.
questions. And Chris says, do you get halim there, Steve? It's famous during Ramadan.
Possibly. I'm not sure.
That's like a stew. I've had a look. It's a stew popular in the Middle East.
I suspect yes, but there are so many special dishes around. I'm surprised, fasting at the time of Ramadan, I think must be the most weight gaining period of any Muslim's life, because the food that they have around the Ramadan period, during the fasting period, is some of the best and most fattening foods. So, yeah, I'm fasting. Look, one of the reasons we haven't flown anywhere, and people say to us, fly back to Australia.
Because COVID-19 is fake, that's how we didn't catch it. It's the flu. Been known since the 50s as the flu.
Look, that is true. COVID-19, whether you want to argue the point with me or not, and it's not an arguable point. It is a flu virus. Actually, the common cold is also a coronavirus. So the coronavirus, the common cold, you can look it up. It is the problem with this virus is we're not talking about it today. We're not talking about it today. So look, got my Pedy. It's a different name. The egg one's got a different name. Is there anyone in the chat can give me the correct name for the egg Pedy, the egg coated? I think it has a slightly different name. A name that I haven't yet worked out.
Well, Paul Webber has given you $20 for beer money.
Ah, Paul, I will use it. I will use it for beer, man.
We've got a 3-weekend lockdown.
We're back to another lockdown.
Curfew.
Cheers, mate. Cheers, Paul. We're back to another lockdown. It's going to be a 3-day lockdown, this one. There's a whole bunch of guys on the corner of my street over here practicing almost no social distancing at all, having a good time, no masks on, all chatting and drinking tea. But over this next Friday, Saturday and Sunday, we have a curfew. We're not allowed to go out again. That's really nice, Paul. Thank you, buddy. That's much appreciated. This bread is so hot.
Chris is saying, are you planning any more lockdown cooking videos?
We might, Chris. I might get another cup of tea if I can, Michelle.
A cup of tea.
Oh.
I'm trying to get some hot bread.
You go for it. You have your hot bread. Look, she's over there. Look, she's over sneaking the hot bread.
Trying to do questions.
Don't do questions. She's over there sneaking into, and we're both trying not to get too much bread, but I thought it'd be nice for the live stream to show you how beautiful, how close the baker is, how delicious the fresh bread is. Let me just, how delicious the fresh bread is, how lucky we are to have such great feta cheese where we are, and why I'm putting weight on, why travelling broadens the behind, not the mind. So we're going to cut down on our bread, actually. So the question earlier on, do we get bread daily?
No.
By choice, I would always get the bread here daily, but I'm trying to actually go to once a week, twice a week at most, so we can, and already that's having some effect. I'm starting to, get the weight back into check, which is a good thing. Flying with the virus, yes. I mean, I wouldn't want to fly back to Australia at the moment with so many people sick. And it's not, actually, I'm not scared of the current COVID-19. I'm not scared of that at all, not even in the slightest. What I am concerned about is this time of year, I don't like to fly anyway. This is the between sort of November and February, March time is the worst time to get colds and flu and everything you can get, because those planes are just incubation capsules for that stuff. They do have, air conditioning in them, but you're always, frequently, if I'm going to get sick at all, traveling and flying, it will be flying during those high flu season times. So no, I'm not going to be flying anytime soon. I just don't want to do it. Maybe come sort of late May, we might, early June, we might consider it. But at the moment, it looks like we are stuck here in Turkey for at least, another month. It's hard to say. So, let's get back to Australia. Let's get back to Australia and talk about your upcoming trips to Australia. And if you've any questions about what you should be thinking about or planning to go to Australia, ask them here so this live stream becomes, you know, informative and interesting for those people that are watching at a later date. Now, Ben, you are thinking of going in September time. Are you going there for a few months? Are you planning? If I hope, hopefully Ben's still in. Are you going to go there for any length of time? I think you mentioned you really wanted to start being a bit of a global nomad and, you know, working remotely. So if you are going to go there for question keeps being missed. Okay, Michelle, we'll get to that in a minute, Ben. I can't read them from this distance. I just sort of see
the names of other towns that you mentioned, apart from Noosa and Townsville.
I've actually toured more of other parts of Australia than I have in the northern Queensland, to be honest, Ben. So I've said to you already, Montville, Maleny, Mooloolaba, Noosa, Toowoomba, Townsville, Rainbow Beach. There's a lot of places that are worth visiting, but I always think if you're going to get the feeling for any country, visit those smaller towns. You know, I if you want to feel what Australia's like, you don't want to do Sydney and Brisbane and Melbourne. You want to do the smaller towns if you can, although you want to do the cities as well, obviously. Now, personally, if I only had one place to go and I was going to Australia, I'd certainly go to Victoria and Tasmania would be one of my sort of top choices. I think if you can, getting over to Perth, which is, as far as we're concerned, is almost another country. It's so far away from us, but it's still a wonderful place to go. There aren't that many big cities in Australia, so you can take them, but I do think anybody who goes that way and doesn't try and get down to Tassie is probably doing themselves an injustice. Tasmania is our sort of west country, Ben, to give you a similar sort of experience. It's where all the great food is, and produce and small farms and small holdings, all that sort of stuff you're going to find there. I can't really recommend other towns in the northern part of Queensland, because there are many towns I've been through that I can barely remember the names of. Where is Mount Tamborine? Is that would you check?
It's just
is that New South Wales?
No, I think it's
Mount Tamborine. If you can go to Mount Tamborine, that's a beautiful little part of the world. It's you go up, climb up into the mountains, and there's this plateau on the top. And Tamborine. Okay, that's part of Queensland. Definitely Mount Tamborine's a beautiful part of the world. It's got lovely pasture down the bottom of Mount Tamborine where they do a lot of horse breeding. It's such a pretty part of the world, and if you go up the hill, and it's a real climb to get up the hill, I think there's even a train or something that maybe goes up there, but if you can get up to Tamborine, that's well worth visiting. There's so many places, Ben. If you're not going to have a vehicle, you're really going to only get to do sort of your Townsvilles, Newcastle. Newcastle's a nice town.
yes.
Good place. What's the other town that we really liked up that way, which
Yeah, think of it in a minute.
Michelle will have a look.
I mean, Byron Bay is very pretty, isn't it? That's the easterly point of.
Byron Bay is superb.
See, Dirk Stewart says, I'd love to go there and check out the opal mines. Best opal in the world comes from Australia.
Coober Pedy is Pedy is really famous for its opal mines. Who said that? Dirk. Yeah, we've got videos up on Coober Pedy. I think we've got a small video when we're in Coober. It's fascinating because the old miners, the diggers that were there were living underground. They dug out caves to live in underground because it was so hot and so hard. But there's a famous lady there who who built a house with a pool, an underground pool, Annie something or another. So there's some lovely old properties, and you can still go there and live. I mean, they're still mining for opals and some other sort of semi-precious stones that they mine in that area. Every plot in that area is a mining plot. There are hundreds of prospectors, guys out there. It's almost like the Wild West. Even today, it's almost like the Wild West. There are people that are sort of stake their piece of land,
You go,
and they're digging.
noodling, don't you?
Noodling. Michelle and I don't know if we've got the video up there. You can check out in the. You can always have a look and Google Steve's Kitchen, Coober, Pedy, and we noodling is just walking across the big open outback areas of Coober and places like that, looking for opals in the ground, and you find all sorts of fascinating stones and things when you do that. So do a bit of noodling. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Port Macquarie was the place, right?
Port Macquarie, that was a lovely spot as well. There's a lot of good towns on the coast, you know, a lot of good coastal towns, more so on the coast than there are inland, but the hinterlands have got some real cool old towns.
And Ben says, I'll be going back for 3 months between September and December if Australia allows people to enter the country by then.
Yeah, we're not letting you in, Ben. No, I think you'll be fine. As I say, you're going for the hot months again, though. You're going for the hot months. That's.
Go a bit south.
I would, if I was going for that long, I'd consider going to. It depends what you like, also, Ben. I know a little bit from reading about your history there in your blog post. If you like that hot, dry weather, you'll be fine. But if you want something that gives you more clement weather for that time of year, you've got to get down to sort of Victoria and Tassie.
It's not really dry, isn't it? Very humid out there.
It can get dry though, but the humidity gets really. I mean, it drains you.
Chris Hereford said, what's Adelaide like?
Adelaide's a lovely town. Adelaide's a very walkable town. Sorry, I haven't mentioned Adelaide before. You know, you've got the great wine regions there. There's a lot of wine grown, so it's great to visit the vineyards. Adelaide as a city centre is really easy to walk around, so it's a nice city centre. But you want to try, if you're going to stay in Adelaide, you really want to try and find a place that's in the city, I think, if you're going to be there only for maybe a week or two. So you can actually get and explore it. Historically, it's a very interesting city as well. Got a lot of German influence. There's a lot of Germanic sort of settlers that were in Adelaide. So you've got, I think, a town called Handorf, which is named after one of the old German towns. And you'll go there and see. I'm not that keen on places like Handorf because they're a little bit touristic, but they've got all the cuckoo clocks and the sort of lederhosen and a lot of sort of German bric-a-brac. But for me, if I want to see that stuff, I'd rather go to Bavaria. But it's interesting. It's quite interesting. And they have a similar part. If you're up in Queensland, Ben, you don't decide to come down. If you do the 3Ms, Montville, Mullaney, and no, not Maryville. One of those towns up in the hinterland behind the Sunshine Coast is one of those old German towns, and it's got all the sort of German clock towers and everything going on like that. So you can check out that. But I love the old settlers towns. You know, the towns that feel like they've literally got sort of one donkey and a handful of residents. Just got some Pedy breathed down my throat.
Ben said, I was built earlier, but I need to put my things into storage and I can't move out until August to start travelling.
Well, if it's the start of your journey, don't discount going south. If you want to get the best out of Queensland, I would say you want to be going there in sort of late April, that sort of time. That's when you want to get the best out of your Queensland experience. But if you can bear that heat, you know what it's like. You were there last year. If you can bear that heat, it's still a great place to be. A lot of people I've spoken to over the years kind of wish they weren't up in northern Queensland at that time of year. They get to the stage where they literally don't get out because the heat's so oppressive, and that can be hard going. When you get acclimatized to there, it can get better, but I know people that have lived there all their lives still find it hard to do anything during the summer months. So a little bit of Pedy, a little bit of feta. Daniel, the most popular Aussie cuisine, probably currently most popular, would be Macca's. We've been taken over by the junk food revolution. Yeah, no, different parts of Australia will give you different favourites. Certainly if you're in Adelaide, you should try and find one of they're getting hard to find now, but the old pie floater stands. So you can find in Adelaide, they serve a beautiful meat pie in a dish. It should be floating in mushy peas and lots of tomato sauce all over the top of it. So pie floaters, really good in Adelaide. You can get them in other cities, but I think it originates from Adelaide, and it's a regular. We have really good fish and chips as well in Australia. There's some great chip shops. There's a lot of very similar food that you might find in the UK. Great
international cuisines because it's an international.
Yeah, it's really, you can get anything. You can get such, particularly in the big cities like Melbourne and Sydney, you can get almost any cuisine. You'll get a lot of really good seafood up in Queensland. If you're up there, Ben, you can get some fantastic Moreton Bay bugs and good shellfish, really good shellfish and fish, but it's expensive. It can be expensive. So best thing to do is get some mates, get some Aussie mates and get in with a crowd, and maybe you can find, I mean, one day Michelle and I, when we first went up to, I always remember, excuse me, when we first went up to Queensland, we were stopped near Noosa again. It was a place called, I forget the name of the little town, but it might have been Tewantin, one of the smaller towns. And there were some lads who were shrimping. They were getting sort of small shrimps, and they came off the boat and just gave us they cooked them on the boat, and they gave us a big bag of these things, and that was delicious. So, get to know some Aussies, talk with them, and you'll get to find out what's good. Another thing you could consider if you're going to be there a long time, Ben, any number of months, is house sitting. House sitting is something Michelle and I have done a lot of in Australia. It's a really good thing. Sorry about that. Don't worry if we get disconnected like that, we will come back. I found this, unfortunately, has the picture quality gone down since I went down to get the bread?
It's good now, you're back.
If it has, I apologise. So house sitting is good. House sitting is when people are going away on holiday and they want somebody to look after their pet. Generally, it's always house sitting for an animal, cats, dogs. It's a very good way of seeing a place. There are some pitfalls to house sitting. Now, I will tell you, there is a website called Trusted House Sitters. I don't recommend it. It's really a commercial site. It's not the best. Michelle and I have never got anything from it. So sorry, Trusted House Sitters, you're rubbish. But there is Aussie House Sitters and minerhome.australia or something like that. They're worth checking out. The one pitfall with house sitting is they can quite often be long stints. So you can end up, having to do a good few weeks house sitting. And unless you know the area, you can often be stuck in the middle of nowhere. Even in a city, you can be in not the best part of the city, way out in the suburbs, and it can make the house sitting event sounds really good because you don't pay for house sitting. They basically will let you stay there for free as long as you look after their dogs. And there's a lot of hoops. I'm not going to go through a Q&A on house sitting, but it's another option. The other thing, Ben, if you're going to be in Australia, I think you mentioned about the costs. I mean, certainly over in Perth, the last time I had a beer with a mate out in Perth, it was something. 2 beers was $30, $15 a beer for not even a full pint. Beer drinking out can be very expensive. Don't be surprised to be charged as much as sort of $12-15 for 1 pint of beer. So if you're a beer drinker, which I'm not particularly, so that's I don't drink a great deal. Otherwise, I'd be flat broke drinking in Australia. That's good. Smoking, cigarettes, really. If you're a smoker and you're going to Australia, Cigarettes are, I think at the moment, $32 a packet. So they're more expensive than the UK. They're much, much more expensive than almost everywhere else in Europe. So, hello, Rick. How are you, mate? Rick, we're talking all about Australia now, mate. We were just talking about RVs. Rick's the guy if you need to know about RVs. But RVs around Australia, and Rick I know would love it. An RV around Australia is a great way to go. If you can buy an RV, something that maybe is a self-build RV, or you can buy a vehicle and make it into an RV for yourself, it's the cheapest way to get around Australia for sure. It's the best and most exciting way to travel. You can stop, you can see all the different coastal areas, you can get out into the outback. There's so much you can do. Now, Rick's does his own home build RVs. He's got some fantastic videos on how to construct an RV from scratch. So yeah, you can check out Rick. So I'm not giving another shout out, Rick. Michelle thinks we've got a bromance going on, keep sharing our sort of self, but you know, but it's true, man. Yeah, it can be inspirational, and I think that's a good way of going around. Another good way for keeping your costs down and still having a really good experience is get a place where you can cook. You know, the supers in Australia are not so expensive. You know, you can buy good food and you can cook your own food. Another great thing to do if you're touring and you want to keep your costs down but have, you know, not everybody's trying to budget. Michelle and I are always doing it on the cheap because we're on a very tight budget for what we do. Parks, national parks, Ben. I think you've been to a few of them. Some of the national parks are fantastic. Some of the botanical gardens in the big cities are amazing. They're a great day out. Really, I encourage you to get out into our national parks and some of our city parks. It's a great experience. They are beautiful, and you'll see animals. Ben, you would have seen quite a few fascinating animals up in the north there. You certainly see a lot of parrots, which a lot of people don't see around the world. You'll see beautiful lorikeets, parrots, galah, all the pretty Australian birds.
And the trees are so different, aren't they?
And the trees in the north are extremely different. You're going to see some species of flora that you'll not see anywhere else in the world, and it is the most gorgeous flora, I think.
Ben says Ken's botanical garden was impressive.
Yeah, the botanical gardens, they're inspirational from a lot of the original British settlers that were there, so they've been done in that style. They are some of the best botanical gardens that you'll find in the region. They're a lot of fun. They're a good day out. Also, Ben, while you're there, check out on Facebook groups and things and see what events are on. There's often great music events, and there's great sort of gatherings and county fairs and things going on. Particularly that time of year, you may find that there'll be some sort of arts in the park type events on that you can go to, and they're well worth it. They're great for meeting people. They're not expensive. A lot of them, some of them are free. There's often stuff. Ben, if you do decide to take my advice and go down south to Melbourne, Australia, there's a lot of free events go on around the parks and things down there. And talking of birds, if you're down that way, you can go and see penguins for free. A lot of people go to Phillip Island and things, but actually you can see the penguins in the city as well. So there's penguins, believe it or not. And I've got a video, maybe Michelle can throw it up if she can find it. You can see penguins in Melbourne, in the city itself, and it's free. You go down there, have a great experience. There's a lot you can do in a country for free. Michelle and I know, because we're always doing everything on a budget. We can't afford to spend like a lot of you do when you go away for a short holiday and you might chuck a few $1,000s at a holiday. We can't do that traveling as we do, because we're always, sorry, I keep glancing, there's so much traffic going on outside. Any of you that didn't come in, I've been down to buy some fresh hot Pedy bread from the bakers downstairs, and the street was pretty busy.
Daniel said he just Google searched pie floaters. Wow.
Pie floaters, great.
So I'm just just putting up the Aussie penguins in Melbourne.
St Kilda. Penguins are great.
Rena C said, I'm taking notes. Opals and penguins.
Opals,
Wow.
and penguins, and whale spotting, and dolphin spotting. It's beautiful if you get up on the northern side of Perth. If you get in Western Australia, and get up towards Broome and the peninsula there, you've got some amazing wildlife and sea life. It's just fantastic. All of that you'll see if you check out some of our videos, and also the spring flowers. When is this?
Well, we went,
What do they call them? Do they call them spring flowers? There's a name for the flower season. In parts of Australia, particularly in Western Australia, it's famous for the spring flowers, and it's beautiful. I mean, you will see oceans and oceans of, they're not spring flowers though, what is it called? The Western Australia flowers. Maybe if any of you can Google quicker than Michelle. The flowers around Shark Bay, we stayed in Shark Bay, camped around that area, really cool. When will I come back to China? I've got no problems with China at all. Beautiful part of the world, and we will go back to China. It was a great time we had there. Super, but not anytime soon. We're not planning to do that side of the world at the moment. So yeah,
wildflowers.
just okay. The wildflower season. The wildflower season. For those of you that love your flowers, you will see if you've been in the UK and seen the bluebell seasons, when the bluebells come in the forests and the woodlands in the UK, you'll see acres and acres of wildflowers, and they're absolutely gorgeous. We missed it. We were in a little town in Western Australia called York, named after York in the UK, and we probably just missed the best of the wildflower season, but we saw some of it, and it's quite amazing because it's a very dry, very arid country, as we've mentioned before. So you end up with this sea of wildflowers, beautiful wildflowers. If you go over and just touch those flowers, they almost feel like paper flowers. They have all the colours, all the vibrance that you'd expect from, you know, the fuchsias, the pinks, the greens, not the greens, the yellows and deep reds and things. But when you go close, they're almost like they've been dried out. The petals are so crispy and lightweight because they have to be. They don't put the water into the petals, so it's really fascinating. I don't know if you'll see that anywhere else in the world. Very much worth it. Eating out in Australia, you've got some of the best cafe life in the world. I think, Ben, I don't know Cairns that well. I don't know how you found the cafes up there. I remember you saying there was one that was particularly good. You said it didn't look that good, but it was much better inside. Our eating out lifestyle is really very good.
Coffee, can't beat coffee.
Coffee, Australian coffee, man. Best coffee in the world, I think. You know, the coffee culture over there, really good quality coffee. But again, you know, we lived up in Noosa for some years, and we would go sometimes down to a cafe in the city, in the town centre, and they did dreadful coffee. There was one place I remember that the coffee was appalling. It was just wishy-washy, no coffee. So you do. We gave it 2 chances, never went there again. You do have to pick and choose. You can't just arrive in Australia, go and have a coffee and say, "Oh, that was rubbish." You've got to find the places. You know, you've got to find the places. So wildflowers, what was that, Rena?
Rena says, I love wildflowers like nowhere else in the world.
Yeah, wildflowers in Australia are unusual. They're very unusual. You get beautiful flowers all around the globe, don't you? You get sort of all parts of the world have some amazing flower displays, but the wildflowers in Western Australia, some of the most prettiest fields of flowers, and they come every year.
That's what Ben said. We've just had such great weather over the past few weeks in the UK, so we've been able to see the bluebell season start. I'm surprised just how scenic UK national parks and forests are when we have such a cold climate. Yeah,
oh no. UK has some of the most beautiful scenery anywhere in the world, or as beautiful as anywhere in the world. Everywhere has its pluses, but the UK. I used to, when I was visit my grandparents in the UK, used to go to a little wood they used to call Bluebell Wood, and quite amazing. What an absolute amazing. And they say actually that a lot of these bluebell woods have gone, but they still are there. There's nothing like a complete sea of bluebells. Well, that's what the wildflowers in Western Australia look like to me. They kind of remind me of that, but no woodland. On the drive back, for example, when we were coming back down to Melbourne, Ben, you might be interested in this. We were driving down from Alice Springs down to Melbourne, all the way through Adelaide and the back there. We stopped in a little woodland that was actually planted. I can't remember the exact historical references, but it was an English woodland. It had oak trees and acorns everywhere, and it smelt like an English woodland. There were mushrooms growing on the bark, there were oak trees all over the place, and it was the most like an enchanted wood. I mean, you would never have believed it was there. And the oak trees were huge. They'd grown in a very different way to the oak trees would grow in Europe. You know, French oaks as we used to have in France, or the British oaks that you would have in the UK. They'd grown in a much different way because of the complete different climate. But there was that smell, that damp wood smell, and there was oyster mushrooms and everything growing in the woodland, and everything was mossy. Fantastic. Like the scene of the old curiosity shop, if you ever remember, where the grandfather's running away with the daughter and they say she walks across the moss which rebounds like breath off a mirror. I always remember that sort of visual in my head, and we had that in the woods in Australia. Can you believe it? Beautiful moss that was just soft growing, and we camped there, and it was damp, wasn't it? Cool, damp and cold. Beautiful. So you'll get everything. You'll get everything. And there's skiing in Australia. My daughter goes regularly in Melbourne. She goes regularly not skiing, snowboarding up in the mountains there, the snowy mountains behind. We've got quite a few mountain ranges, the Alps that run up behind us in Victoria. You can do everything. And there's a lot of, I keep encouraging, when I meet young people, I actually said to this lad here, Taha, I said, you know, if you get a chance, you should go to Australia, man, because you're nearly 30. I think he's 29. So if you're under the age of 30, you can still go to Australia, pre all this nonsense. You can go there and spend a year as a youngster. Most countries can go there and spend a year and work for 6 months and travel for 6 months. And it's a great place to go. So it is a great place to go.
So Rick says the UK is called the green and pleasant land for a reason.
It is. And did those feet in ancient times, Rick? Absolutely, mate.
Chunk asks, hi Steve, what's the food like in Australia? I've covered that a little bit.
The food in Australia is fantastic. If you're in a city like we are in Melbourne, we have a great Greek community, Italian community, Turkish community. We've got there's almost
Lebanese.
There's Lebanese community, so we get all the different food cultures from around Europe. There's huge Chinese communities there, probably even more Chinese communities now than there's ever been. So you can get Asian food. There's a big Vietnamese community, so there's great Vietnamese food. Very good food, absolutely. I would say our supermarkets are not as good as the American supermarkets, to be honest. Sorry guys in Australia, if you haven't really travelled through the meats and the veggies they get, the variety are better over there. Our supermarket chain, sadly, we've just got two really. There is some independent IGA shops that are a bit like the Spars and things in Europe, but as a rule it's Coles and Woolworths, and their variety of food is possibly some of the most limited I've seen around the world. I'm not a big fan of our supermarkets. We'll get one sort of potato, one sort of cabbage, so that's not so good. But you can get to smaller stores. Look out for IGAs, they're Independent Grocery Association stores. They're always good. So the food's good.
And so Chris Hereford said, did you visit the botanical gardens in Ooty, Steve?
No, we did not. But I did see a lot of beautiful plant life in Ooty. I mean, we saw, I don't know if St Stephen's Church for some reason had bottle brushes and agapanthus and all sorts growing in the gardens there. Plants that I recognise. Chris, I don't know if there's been some Australian influence. I think some of those plants in the gardens there are Australian species. So I'm not quite sure why that is. Now I'm just going through my notes. if anyone...
Just Rena, talking about trees, says eucalyptus trees. I watched one of the videos where you and Michelle saw so many different varieties.
Yes, the eucalypt trees are amazing. We've got a photograph ourselves up in the Northern Territories under a, what's the tree? Michelle will search it for me. There's a tree in the Northern Territories which is possibly my favourite tree of all, so I should remember the name of it. It is literally there's a photo. We got a photograph of the boa trees. Yeah, boab trees. Now the boab trees in Australia. Did you see them, Ben, up north? Did you see boabs? They're like a big bulbous fat tree that runs up. You can Google it. Anyone that's online, well, you're all online. You're watching this. Boab trees. Most amazing trees and so suited to the Australian climate. Now they're mainly up in probably run from sort of Catherine all the way across to Broome. You'll see boabs growing up there. These trees will survive the big bushfires because they literally are so fat and bulbous at the bottom that they will survive almost any natural disaster. They're beautiful trees. I don't know if I can't share you a picture, but
share the spelling. I think this is how you spell it.
And boabs of B-O-A-A-B, B-O-A-B, aren't they?
No, I don't. Oh, hang on.
I'm going to Michelle's. I'm going to do it as well with you guys. You can all do it.
Yeah, probably more. Boab. Yes.
Yeah, it's a boab tree. Now we've had them as big as the car where you're parking next to them, and the car they dwarf the car. Great big sort of fat bases to them. But if they're engulfed in a fire, the fire can only really damage the very outer layer of the tree, and they just don't burn down. So they're no, it's boab, not boabab tree, Michelle. And also the history of the boab tree, because I think many thousands of years, perhaps even millions of years, they may have come to the continent of Australia. It'd be millions of years. It may have come from Africa. So the only other place in the world I think boabs grow is some parts of Africa. And there's no way that they can think of that the seeds would have come across from all these many centuries unless they were brought across by the early vessels that went between. We're talking many tens of thousands of years. Some of the boab trees live to be a grand old age. So that's really beautiful. But to park underneath a boab tree, that is amazing. And we've got some examples of boabs in some of our videos. So if you want to get the real feel for that, then watch the Australian series. It's probably worth it. Look at all this lovely bread. I'm literally dribbling. If you're wondering why I'm dribbling.
Ben said it was odd to see Woolworths in Australia. In the UK, we used to have a chain called Woolworths, but they weren't general grocery stores.
No, Woolies in Australia are actually an interesting story because Woolworths in the UK, Ben, is actually an American store. It's not a British store. The Americans came over with Woolworths in, I think, the 50s or something. They opened up the original Woolworths stores in the UK. And they actually took the name Woolworths and they copyrighted it in the UK. And they went bankrupt, I think, about maybe several years ago. But they never copyrighted the name in Australia. So some bright spark in Australia just started a whole independent, nothing to do with Woolworths in the UK or the US. They started a brand new, their own company called Woolworths. That particular company is still thriving and doing well, though it has no connections with the Woolworths Group in the US or the UK for that matter. I think Woolworths was J.C. Penney or someone. There's a connection between Woolworths Group, but Woolworths in England was more sort of bric-a-brac and stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, Ben said that. Sorry, Ben.
So
2008.
eucalyptus was brought to Uti from Australia. We have the red and bullgum trees.
Yes, so there's been some great plants taken around the world, but we're very cautious now of not bringing unnative species into Australia. And there's a good example of that going very badly wrong in Portugal, where they actually started pulling up all their olive trees, beautiful olive and cork trees. They used to have a massive cork plantation in Portugal, and they found they could make more money from growing eucalypt in Portugal and in Spain, by the way. Eucalypt, as you probably know, is an immensely volatile oil. It will burn very easily, and that is why they keep having these most disastrous fires now. And the other thing the eucalypt trees have done in Portugal and in southern parts of Spain is the toxicity. They damage the soil so badly that it takes decades before you can ever grow anything again on the soil after you planted them. So they are beautiful plants, but don't go growing eucalypt trees outside the native Australia, because it's literally destroyed an industry and destroyed a country in many parts of Portugal. The farmers really greatly regret planting those eucalypt trees, and there's some dreadful stories each year when the fires start. So any questions? I think I've covered most of what I wanted to, Ben, in my Australia speak there. It was a lot easier than typing it to you, mate, so I hope you appreciate that.
A little bit earlier on in the feed there, Ben said, I don't know why people spend so much on packaged holidays. When I went to Australia last time, I spent less than $200 a week on accommodation, and I was there for 2 months. Anyone can travel on the cheap.
You can, and that's a good thing. But you see, I can flip and flop on that a little bit, or because I've never done package holidays. Michelle and I have never really done it. We're always very independent, but you can be a little jealous sometimes of people that have got those package holidays. You know, sometimes you think, oh, I wish I could do that. You know, just have everything sort of provided for you. So let's not knock it. I mean, the package holidays work for some people, and those that don't like package holidays, like myself and Ben, we can further enjoy independent travel. Just open the window and the stupid bike will go by again. So we can enjoy the independence of travel. It can certainly be, I don't know, over the time whether we'll share more and more information about how to travel on the cheap. Michelle and I do it pretty well. Sometimes I don't even know how to explain it really. And quite often, a lot of the things, I'm going to close that, it's going to get noisy outside. A lot of the things that we do wouldn't appeal to a lot of people, you know. So there you go.
A lot of people like things to be all set out.
A lot of people do. I always, when I talk to my mate Scott in Bangkok, because his mother goes away on package deals every year, she goes away and has these sort of package holidays, and she loves them. And for people like Scott and myself, we and Ben here as well, and a lot of you out there, I can't do that sort of tour. I don't want everything to be controlled, because I want to get away from often the places that package tours take you to. I don't want to be going to those locations. Michelle and I prefer more sort of unusual locations. So I'm going to start to wrap this up, I think, unless we've got any questions. There's enough information out there. If you've enjoyed the show, if you've enjoyed the banter, certainly hit that thumbs up. I haven't said that through the video. If you watch this later on, hit the thumbs up. I think it helps with the algorithms and what have you. Thank you very much for the super chat. That's always a great help. I know we've got Patreons out there that follow the channel and have always supported us. And I know we don't do independent stuff for our patrons. They're more sort of supporting us just in general. I do appreciate those people greatly. And
Dwayne's just come in, says hello.
Dwayne, now you come in as I'm about to go. Every time I say I'm about to go, a lot of the regulars start rocking in. I see Mona's there still, and Arena and Chris, Dwayne.
I love the way you and Michelle travel around the world.
Yes, well, we've become pretty good at traveling. People don't often believe that it's probably cheaper for us to travel than it is to stay at home. We've got it to that state where we do travel fairly lightly in many ways. So, loved you all. We'll do another live stream. I'll tell you what we might do. Rick, if you're still around, what we might do is take you out on the streets, maybe after the curfew. I might go out on the streets and do a walk. I know I get a lot of grief because I'm not going to wear my mask on the street. I'm going to take you out because I don't want to be sat there, as you saw me at the bakery, not getting fresh air. So I might take you out on the streets with this this setup that we've got here and show you a little bit. We need to get out in the fresh air, don't we, guys? We do need to get out in the fresh air. And I'll take all the grumbling and all the moaning and the sort of the finger pointing and wagging, what have you. I think we might take this live stream out on the streets sometime next week. So we've got that to look forward to. And if you
says quickly, I must say I enjoyed your adventures in India and in Turkey. Cheers.
Thank you, Dwayne. Beautiful man. So yes, we're going to do a walkabout, and we'll take all the grief and we'll take all the complaints and what have you.
Video ready to go up. We'll go up in a couple of days.
We've got an India video, Chris. You'll love it. It's another one in Ooty. It is Michelle and I moving from our first place to a second place. Lovely place in Ooty that we were, and we've got another video I'm working on as well. But I'm enjoying the live streams. I hope you are too. And I'm going to sit and eat some of this beautiful bread and finish my tea and my lovely feta cheese here before it's too cold. Here she is.
I've eaten mine.
Have you eaten yours?
Yeah, it was delicious. It was warm.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing for you guys. That's what I'm doing. I'm sat here, I'm having cold Pedy. I'm having cold Pedy, cold tea, cold feta cheese, while Michelle sits there in the corner scoffing away.
It's all right.
That's why I'm so slim, you know. That's why I'm almost like Twiggy from the 1960s. I'm so thin. Love to you all. Take care, and we will see you for another live stream very, very soon. Be good. Oh, and check out that new video in the next couple of days. Take care.